Okay, hello everybody. So today we're going to go over the central nervous system. So in your Edmodo, go to the post that says central nervous system. You have a link for the reading. You have my email you can send your assignment to, and you have the practice questions you're supposed to do and turn into me. So, trying to get to the reading that's behind here. Okay, I'll just go through it this way. So let's get into this thing we call the central nervous system. And of course it's got to do that too. Okay, so the central nervous system, we already learned that is the brain and the spinal cord. All right. So we've already learned about the protection with the layers of extracellular fluid and the bones of the skull and the vertebrae protecting the brain and the spinal cord. So in a chemical sense, the brain and spinal cord are going to be isolated from the blood and the toxins or pathogens, harmful things in the blood, by the blood-brain barrier. So the blood-brain barrier is a very selective membrane, so it's just this layer. It only lets certain things through and only lets certain things out. Okay, so it's formed of endothelial cells, separates the circulating blood from the extracellular fluid in the central nervous system, and it only allows certain things to get through: water, gases, glucose, and then some other molecules that are needed by the brain and spinal cord. So the brain is the control center not only of the nervous system, but of you, everything. Your brain controls everything. The adult brain makes up about 2% of your body's weight, but it is going to use 20% of the body's energy. So it has a lot of cells, it has a lot of connections, it's a very complex thing. So the brain is going to control certain mental processes such as reasoning, imagination, memory, and language. It is going to interpret information from your senses and tell your body how to respond to this information. It is going to control physical processes such as voluntary and involuntary things. So the brain has three major parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. All right, so here's the cerebrum, all this big wrinkled area. This is the cerebellum under the cerebrum, and this is the brainstem. All right. So the brainstem is going to be the lowest part of the brain. So the cerebrum is kind of perched on the brainstem, and the brainstem is going to connect the brain with the spinal cord and pass nerve impulses between the brain and the spinal cord. All right. It's also going to control certain vital functions, certain things you need to live, such as heart rate and breathing. And then the upper part of the brainstem is going to control certain reflexes. All right. The cerebellum is just below the cerebrum, and it's behind the brainstem. So this one coordinates body movements and it's involved in movements that are learned with repeated practice. So stuff that you do over and over, like if you try to hit a baseball, or or typing, stuff you have to do over and over to get better at it. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain, controls conscious intellectual functions, so all sorts of things that require thinking. So it's going to control reasoning, language, memory, sight, touch, and hearing. All right. Hemispheres and lateralization. So the cerebrum is divided from the front to back into two halves called left and right hemispheres. They're going to be connected by a thick bundle of axons called the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is going to be the avenue of communication between the two hemispheres. All right. So the hemispheres are similar in shape, and most areas of the cerebrum are going to be found in both hemispheres, but some areas are going to be concentrated in one side, and this is called lateralization. All right. So in most people, language functions are more concentrated in the left hemisphere, and abstract reasoning and visual spatial abilities are going to be more concentrated in the right hemisphere. So this is why we get the whole right brain, left brain person. So for reasons that are not yet clear, each hemisphere is going to interact with the opposite side of the body. So the left side is going to receive messages from and send them to the right side of the body. And the right side of the brain is going to send and receive messages between the left side of the body. All right. So each hemisphere of the cerebrum is further divided into 4 lobes. We have the frontal lobe, which is involved in reasoning, the parietal lobe, which is involved in touch, occipital lobe, which is involved in sight, and then the temporal lobe, which is involved in hearing. All right. Cerebral cortex. So a lot of the information that gets processed in the brain gets processed in the cerebral cortex. So this is gray matter and other tissues. It's very thin, and it's the outer surface of the cerebrum, and it's that folded, kind of wrinkly in appearance covering. All right. So it's folded so that it can fit over the brain. So that it can fit within the skull. So with all the folds, it has a surface area of about 2.5 square feet. All right. So a few structures deep within the brain are going to be helpful in communication between the brain and the spinal cord. So these are going to be the hypothalamus and the thalamus. All right, and they're very small. They're in here. Here's the thalamus. Here's the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is going to be helping metabolic processes and other activities of the autonomic nervous system. So regulating body temperature, heart rate, hunger, thirst, fatigue, all this stuff listed here. All right. The thalamus is located near the hypothalamus, and this is a place for information traveling back and forth between the spinal cord and cerebrum. So it is going to take sensory signals to the cerebral cortex and motor signals to the spinal cord. All right, and it's involved in the regulation of consciousness, sleep, and alertness. The spinal cord, well, we know what it is. It's this long, thin tube, goes from the brainstem, goes down, all the way down your vertebrae or your backbones. All right. So it is enclosed in your vertebral column, but doesn't go all the way down your vertebral column. So the center of the spinal cord is going to be gray matter. All right. And then the gray matter is going to be surrounded by white matter made of axons and motor and sensory neurons. The axons of motor and sensory neurons. Spinal nerves are going to exit the spinal cord between the vertebrae. All right. Functions of the spinal cord is going to pass messages between the brain and the body. And it's going to control certain rapid responses or reflexes without any input from the brain. All right. When you get injuries to the spinal cord, you can get paralysis, which is when you lose sensation and movement in part of your body. So paralysis is generally going to be any area that is below where the spine was injured. So hopefully that all makes sense. I know it's a lot of information. So make sure you finish your assignments and turn them in to me.